KBC was created by churches for churches to help churches reach Kentucky and the world for Christ. This ministry is brought to you by the Cooperative Program, which funds not only all the work in Kentucky that we do, but also work in North America and around the world. It's the way that Southern Baptists have chosen to fund a global ministry and missions enterprise. My guest today is Jason Lowe. Jason is the AMS, Associational Mission Strategist, for the Pike Association of Churches in Pike County. He's also an executive pastor for First Baptist Church Pikeville, which means he's bivocational. He has two very important roles that he carries out. Most importantly, he's married to Brandy, has two sons, Isaiah and Noah. And Jason is a blessing to Kentucky Baptists. He's used in big ways in our state, but also far beyond in larger national SBC life. Jason, thank you for joining with Leadership Lessons.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. It is an honor to be with you.
So if folks are watching this, they're watching a recorded version. We've tried a couple of times to get going on Facebook Live, and it hasn't happened. So we're going to record this broadcast and put it out to you a little bit later. So Jason and I have been talking back and forth already. But Jason, you were telling me where you grew up, that you're in Pike County now, but you actually grew up in Pike County.
I sure did. My parents still are still here, and they live about 15 minutes away. But I was born and raised here, lived all of my childhood here, and then left for college and came back a couple years later, and then left again for seminary, and then came back again. So I've lived most of my life here in Pike County. I have lived in Louisville for a short time and also another part of the state, but most of my time here in Pike County. And it's a mountainous region. If you've never been here, it is as far east as you can go in Kentucky. We are the easternmost county in the state. It's the largest landmass county in the state, and it's got a population of about 60,000 people. But I've called this home for most of my life, and I love it here.
And Jason, it's a beautiful spot. Pikeville, if folks have never been there, they'll be amazed when they pull into Pikeville. It's just a beautiful town. So much good work has gone into the town. You guys have University of Pikeville there. You have a very large regional medical center, and it's just really an incredible spot. So did you grow up in town, or did you grow up out in the country?
I grew up about 10 miles outside of Pikeville. So, it took 20 minutes to get to where I lived. But, it's out in the county. I don't know that many people know that much about Pike County, but it would be the Johns Creek area. Yep. And so it's about 10 miles from Pikeville. But like I said, it always take a long time to get back to Pikeville back in those days.
Jason, one of my favorite things to do is to knock on doors and share the gospel. And I have a goal of going to every county in the state. There are 120 counties. I've been to probably 50 or so far. But while knocking on doors in Pike County, I love this experience that I would meet people. And so my routine at the door is someone comes to the door, I'm standing 6 or 8 feet away, and I'll tell them who I am, why I'm there. We're talking about the Lord. And I'll say, are you from here? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, born and raised. And usually they'll say, no, I grew up over in somewhere else. Well, in Pike County, when I ask those questions, I'd say, are you from here? And a person would say, yeah, I'm from here. And I'll say, born and raised. They say, oh, no, I grew up over on the South Fork of something creek or another, which was only about a mile from where we're standing. But nevertheless, they identified with that particular spot much more than where they were currently living. Is that common?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's depending on where you live in the county, you identify with that. And really, there was two main groups: those that lived in the city of Pikeville and everybody else. And so I was part of that group that was outside the city of Pikeville. Live here now in the city, but that's how you identify with people around here. When I moved back here in 2013, as I started going around to some of the churches in our association, people would ask, "All right, I heard you're from Pike County. What part?" And so I would have to be very specific about where I grew up.
Well, that's a lot of fun. It's a beautiful region. The mountains themselves are beautiful, and Pikeville is as well. So how did you become a Christian?
Well, I certainly was blessed to grow up in a Christian home. Both my parents I've never known them not to be believers, and so they were believers when I was young. It wasn't a Southern Baptist church. They were part of a different denomination. So it was a denomination, a church that didn't really have a whole lot for young people. And so my experience in that church was to sit through usually an hour and a half to a 2 hour service. And so for a small child, that was quite the challenge. I remember when I was very young, every time I would open my mouth, my mother would stick a lifesaver in it. And so there were many times I would have 4 or 5. It's by the grace of God that I didn't choke on them. But as I got older, I was able to move to the back of the church. I didn't have to sit on the pew with my parents, which was up close, pretty close to the front. Got a little older, I could sit out in the foyer of the church. Got a little older, I could sit in the car. And then probably around my teenage years, I was able to stay home. And so by the age of around 12 or 13, I didn't go to church any longer, just because it didn't appeal to me as a young person at that point. And so it was actually in college at Eastern Kentucky University in Richmond, where a lot of my acquaintances and friends and coworkers there began to just kind of share a little bit about the Lord and ask me if I was a Christian. The Lord used a lot of different people to bring me to faith, but a friend in particular by the name of Mike Chitwood, who has been a Southern Baptist pastor since then, doesn't live in the state of Kentucky now, but was a really good friend of mine back then. He gave me a Bible, and my story's a little different in that I wasn't sitting right across from someone who led me to the Lord. He gave me this Bible, and I've still got it all these years later. And in this Bible, you can see there, it's just a little paperback, but in this Bible, there is a gospel presentation in the back. And so I'll never forget reading through that gospel presentation and then confessing and repenting my sins and putting my trust in Jesus Christ, and signed it with the date even there. You can kind of see
Wow.
there. So that was July 24th, the year 2000.
Jason, that's an incredible story. But I'm still stuck back on how you were moving further and further and further away from the preaching of the gospel. That started out with lifesavers in your mouth. I mean, when I opened my mouth in church, I didn't get lifesavers. I got something else. But eventually you were in the car. So you actually came to the church building, but you just stayed in the car. Was that common? Did other folks do that?
I'm not familiar with a lot of young people doing that back then. But quite honestly, there wasn't a lot of young people in the church.
Yeah.
But in the summer months, I would stay outside and run around the property. But in the winter months is when I would stay in the car.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know Mike. I've seen his name on social media, but I'm grateful for his ministry in your life. So you became a Christian while in college 20 years ago. How did the call to ministry come to you?
Well, after my wife and I had been married a few years, we had moved back to Pike County. My wife's originally from Mount Sterling in Montgomery County, but we moved here to Pikeville. I began working as a statistician at the local hospital here, Pikeville Medical Center, and was a member at First Baptist Church in Pikeville. And so through a lot of different ministries there at the church, I was a Sunday school teacher for the youth high school boys. And then also started a few Bible studies there at the hospital, and so began a workplace ministry there. And 1 year at the hospital, they were doing Holy Week services, and so one of the chaplains invited me to speak and speak during one of those services, and that terrified me. I was petrified. Never done that before, but they were trying to get different employees to do so. And so I considered it an honor, and I did, to a room full of about 15 to 20 people. It felt like 20,000, but 15 to 20 people. And after that was over, a lot of people said, wow, that really spoke to my heart and encouraged me. And so through that, a lot of people started saying, hey, do you ever sense a call to ministry? Same thing at First Baptist. The more and more I served, the more and more I felt God leading me in that direction. And I'll never forget contacting Brother Paul Badgett, who was my pastor. Wow. And I said, Brother Paul, I need to meet with you. And so I came to his office and met with him and shared, I feel like God's calling me to ministry. And so he said, well, I'm not surprised. His wife, Regina, was in the room. She said she wasn't surprised. I had talked to my wife. She said she wasn't surprised, and I said, "Well, I'm glad you guys weren't surprised. It definitely shocked me." And so after that, Brother Paul kind of shared. I said, "I don't know what to do from here, Brother Paul. What do you suggest?" And he said, "At that point, I was 25, 26 years old, didn't have any kids." He said, "What's preventing you from just selling your house, moving to Louisville, and going to Southern Seminary?" And didn't have a good answer for him. And so we put our house on the market. We didn't use a realtor, and the first person drove by it the first day, and we sold our house the first day. And so it was confirmation for us to go to seminary, and so we moved to Louisville in 2006.
Jason, how grateful are you for the advice that Paul Badgett gave you and the confirmation that others gave you? How much did that mean to you at that time?
Well, it meant the world to me. Brother Paul, especially as my pastor, as my spiritual mentor. I did not know what step to take next, and to have someone with his wisdom there to guide me through that process. I sent him a note not too long ago just telling him words will never be able to describe how grateful I am for him. And then just the others in my life, a lot of them were just so encouraging. And I'll never be able to thank the Lord for them enough.
I'm really enjoying listening to people's story about their calling. Jeff Orge, president of Gateway Seminary, says there's three callings. One is a call to growth. Every Christian is called to be a growing Christian, time in the Word, time in prayer, memorizing Scripture, etc., witnessing. A second one is a call to serve. Every Christian ought to be a serving Christian, finding some way to serve the Lord through your local church. But then a third call that doesn't come to everyone is a call to Christian ministry leadership, and that's the call that we're talking about here. So what are some various ministry positions that you've held since that calling?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, as I moved to Louisville, the first thing that my wife and I wanted to do was get plugged into a local church. And so we were able to land at Highland Park First Baptist Church in Jeffersontown, and got to know the pastor at that time was Dr. Jeff Pennington. And so got to know him really well, serve under him, had the opportunity to just serve as a Sunday school director for a couple of years. But then the Lord led me from that position to an actual pastor position while I was still in seminary there at Morningside Baptist Church in Louisville. Okay. And so served there a few years until I graduated from seminary. Those were some sweet, sweet folks. I think of them often. I got a Christmas card from one of those members just this past week, and so still have a connection with many of those sweet, sweet folks. And then the Lord led me to Horse Cave Baptist Church in a full-time position as a minister of education, and served there for a couple of years until the Lord brought my wife and I and two boys at that point back to Pike County, where I've served at the Pike Association since 2013. So 7.5 years there, and then at First Baptist Church in Pikeville, which was my home church, for about 5.5 as an executive pastor.
Yeah. And so who was the pastor at Horse Cave when you were serving there?
Kevin Denton. He's still there. Yeah. I guess probably close to 30 years at this point.
Wow. Well, you've had an incredible wide variety of experience, but before all that, before your calling, you were a statistician. So tell us, what is a statistician? What does one do?
Well, a statistician is usually when I use that term, people think I've got a third arm or something, because it's not that common. But I've always loved numbers. I grew up back in the day before you had Xbox and all these video games that we have today, where they keep all of your stats for you. I had a Nintendo. And I played bases loaded on that Nintendo. Those baseball players didn't even have names; they just had numbers. But I would keep stats for them because I love numbers so much. I wanted to know which player had the most home runs and RBIs and batting average and all of that sort of thing. So I've always loved numbers. So when I went to EKU, that was my goal, was to be a statistician for the rest of my life. And basically, what a statistician does is just they crunch numbers. But they're not like an accountant. An accountant has to be exactly right. They can't be off by a penny. A statistician only has to be 95% confident. We just have to kind of estimate and that sort of thing. So I came back in 2003 to Pikeville and began working at Pikeville Medical Center. as a statistician. And so I just kind of tracked different metrics throughout the hospital. We were in the performance improvement department, so our goal was to always be improving the performance of the hospital in their standard of care with anybody that they came in contact with. So did that for 3 years when the Lord called me to ministry, and I continued working for the hospital remotely for another 7.5 years. So I actually worked for the hospital for 10.5 years as a statistician.
So give an example of something that where you studied the numbers inside the hospital and a change was made or a result of your study.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of examples you could think of. You could think of infection rates after surgery, or one in particular. Every patient that came into the hospital that was a pneumonia patient or a heart failure patient, every one of those patients were supposed to be given, if they were a smoker, stop smoking counseling. And so we were able to track that, and that was known as a core measure. And so a lot of times we said we did it, but we didn't document it. And so our rates were pretty low. And so through pointing that out, some teams in the hospital developed a new system, a new process, and the rates went from about 30% to 100% because it became, we're going to advise everyone, regardless whether they're a smoker or not to smoke. And so that's just one real simple example of how that came about.
I mean, you've done research for me. When I was a team leader with KBC, I asked you to lead research projects. So have you used your statistician skills or training in the church at First Pikeville?
I have. I've certainly used it there as in churches, there are certain numbers that we track, attendance, budget and giving, those types of things, Sunday school attendance, the percentage of worship attenders that are also attending Sunday school or a small group, that sort of thing. So in that type of role, there's a lot of numbers that I can crunch and certainly have. And even beyond just First Baptist Church, through the role at the association, just through a lot of different survey work, as you mentioned, even doing some work as you were team leader. There's a lot of different things to study. And so the Lord has certainly blessed and allowed me the opportunity to study a lot of different kind of aspects of ministry. Just some examples of that would be the ordination practices of local churches. And I did that one, I think the year before last. The value and the relevance of a local Baptist association was another one that was done recently. Best practices of pastor search committees is another one. So the Lord has certainly used that background that I had, and quite honestly, it's still a passion of mine. And so as I, particularly in the last 4 to 5 years, even serving in this role at the association in First Baptist, I've always had that passion, and I just prayed to the Lord, and I said, Lord, I don't think you want to waste those experiences. How can I use that previous experience prior to ministry for kingdom purposes now that I'm in ministry? And he certainly opened up a lot of doors.
Well, it's a unique skill set and much needed. In fact, I don't know another person in vocational ministry who is also a trained statistician. I know lots of folks who are interested in numbers. Has it ever gotten you in trouble studying the numbers of a church or churches? Have there ever been people that said, Jason, we just don't want all this information? Has that ever happened?
Many times, yeah. because the numbers sometimes tell you good things, but they can also point out some areas of opportunities for improvement. And so there have been several times I've made presentations, and I even one time made a presentation and was interrupted mid-presentation and said, I don't like this. Yeah. And I said, well, I hate it. I don't like it either. I don't like the results. But I don't think that denying the results is going to help anything. We want to improve. We want to improve in our service to the Lord. But yeah, I have been interrupted mid-presentation before.
Numbers don't tell the whole story. They tell a story. Ed Stetzer would always say that facts are our friends. I think Rick Warren may have said that as well. Mm-hmm. Well, Jason, so one of the initiatives that's hopefully coming through KBC by the end of 2021 is something, for a lack of a better term, being referred to as calling out the called. And so the little bit of background is that I called 120 churches across the state who were searching for their next senior pastor. I discovered the churches of 100 to 120, 150 and above have lots of candidates they can consider. But the churches of 30, 40, 50, 60, who are depend on bivocational folks, are really having a hard time finding Southern Baptist, Kentucky Baptist men to come pastor their churches. As a result, some have gone to other denominations. They've reached out to some independent Baptists. They referred, even have kind of left the Baptist to find another candidate who's not a Baptist. So our desire is to see churches encouraged in identifying those who are called, just as Paul Badgett did in your life, and then helping them take next steps. Is that a need in Pike County?
Without a doubt. Pike County, as you know, is part of the Appalachian region, and all in this region, there's a population decline. People are leaving the region to find work in other places. And so in Eastern Kentucky in particular, I think in a study that I worked with you guys on, 75% of the churches in Eastern Kentucky have bivocational pastors.
Yeah.
And it's about 60 to 65% in our association. And so the reality is that there's not a long list of people looking to move to Eastern Kentucky to serve in a bivocational position. And so the reality is that we're going to have to identify those, call out those that are already here who are members of our churches, and raise them up and train them and support them. And so that's certainly a need here. We've got one church in particular. It's a small church. They don't have a parsonage. They can't afford much for a pastor's salary, and it's been 4 years since they've had a pastor.
4 years.
And 4 years, and it's a struggle. I call them and talk to them and encourage them as best I can, but it's frustrating for them, and it's frustrating for us at the associational office as well. That it's just hard. I got a call from another church that is going to be, their pastor is going to be resigning at the end of this month, and they're already prepared for a long wait and a long search, just because it's remote, even in Pike County where it's located. They don't have a parsonage. It's going to be another one of those situations, so it's just going to be difficult for them. So that's definitely a need that we have here. One of the things that we've done as an association last year is we actually developed a call to ministry workshop.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, just trying to help identify some of those guys. And we had 4 or 5 men that went through basically a 6-hour workshop. We did it over 3 consecutive weeks, 2 hours per night. Most of these guys work other jobs, so we had to do it in the evening. And so we kind of led them through what the Bible teaches about pastoral ministry, but then also gave them some real tangible feedback. This goes back to kind of my role as a statistician. I developed 5 different assessments to kind of walk them through. And so they would complete those in our workshop. So one is on motivations for ministry. Why do you want to be in ministry? There's this internal calling, but we want to make sure that they're doing it for the right reasons. What do you expect in ministry? Do you expect to get the calls at 3 a.m. From a church member that's been in an accident and you got to rush to the hospital right then? Are you going to be okay with that? Are you going to be okay with getting a phone call while you're on vacation with your family of an emergency in your church? And so kind of walks you through those expectations. A third area is the biblical qualifications. What does the Bible say, and do you meet those qualifications? And with that one in particular, I don't just have those that are going through the workshop to fill it out. I send them home with 3 copies that their spouse needs to fill out one, their pastor, and another trusted friend. And then they send those back to me. They don't send them by the participant in the class, and so then I can compare what they said about the qualifications versus the self-assessment. A fourth area is spiritual gifts. Obviously, there are certain spiritual gifts that a pastor needs. There are obviously differences, but there are a lot of similarities among pastors. Pastors got to be able to teach the Bible, and others. They need to have that shepherding heart. And so we kind of walk through that. And then the last thing finally is the affirmation. Much like I had from Brother Paul and others, do others affirm that calling in your life? And so through this workshop, we've walked 5 or 6 guys through that, and really I tell them this: I want to, if you're called to ministry, I want this to be an affirming time for you. But if you're not called to ministry, I want to do everything I can to talk you out of it. And so absolutely, I think calling out the called is such a need. You know, Jesus said in Luke chapter 10, verse 2, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. And so that's a prayer I've had here. I know it's on your heart as well, all across the state.
Jason, did any of those guys follow through and start doing some preaching in local churches?
Yeah, we've got one that is in one of our local churches. He's still kind of being mentored by the senior pastor, but there's certainly a possibility that he will in the future. But his pastor right now is getting along in years, and so I think there's a good possibility that he'll take over as the pastor of that church once all's said and done. And then there's another one that one of these men that was a part of it was not even in our association. He was from a neighboring association and heard about it and came over. I haven't been as in close contact with him as I have those within the association. But then there were a couple, quite honestly, that I said, listen, God's got a calling on your life, but I don't think it's to pastoral ministry. And they were okay with that. I think, quite honestly, they probably had been hearing some people pushing them that direction, but I don't know that anybody was sharing with them, hey, maybe you're not called. And so they seem to appreciate it.
Well, good job on trying to help guys discern that calling and walk it through. It's certainly on your prayer for laborers. So Jason, you are an AMS, and so everyone may not know what an AMS is. So take a minute and tell us what is an AMS and what do they do?
Well, it is a new term that's been adopted here in Kentucky just the past couple of years. It's been a title that's gone through a couple of iterations. Back in the day, it was referred to as associational missionary, and then the title was changed in most areas to director of missions, and then just in recent years, it's been changed to associational mission strategist. And I do think this title accurately describes the role. It's to help churches partner together at a local level to reach out to their community. And so a mission strategist does exactly what the title says. They strategize ways to do that. How can we help churches partner together to reach Eastern Kentucky, reach Pike County, and ultimately the world for Christ, much like the same role that the KBC does at the state level.
Yeah. So what do you've been at this role for how many years? 7.5
years.
Wow, wonderful. So what do you like most about it? What do you enjoy most about being an associational mission strategist?
I love seeing those times when churches come together and work together for a greater kingdom vision. One of the things that we've done in the association, we weren't able to do it this past summer because of COVID, but Love Loud is an event that we do locally where we get a large percentage of participation from the churches in our association that just love on our communities. We do servant evangelism, we do community service, we do construction projects, but then we also we share the gospel through a lot of those efforts. And so again, the last year that we did it was 2019, and we saw 7 people come to faith in Christ. Wow. in only 5 days. And so we were praising the Lord for that. And so when churches can come together, that blesses me in so many different ways. I'm walking on cloud 9 after a week like that. Also helping churches in transition is another passion of mine. And so right now we will have at the beginning of 2021, 7 out of our 25 churches without pastors. Wow. And so that's obviously a desire of mine, is to help them get from their previous pastor to their next pastor in a healthy fashion, a healthy transition. So that I always enjoy that. But I love having the relationship with the pastors. There's every pastor is different. Some are full-time, some are bivocational, some are they have a year of experience. Some of them have been serving for 40 and 50 years. And so it's always a blessing when I'm able to get those pastors together and just learn from them and just just encourage one another, because it's
Yep.
lonely being a pastor.
Right.
And there's some things that you can't share with anybody in your church, but you need somebody to talk to. And so I enjoy having those one-on-one conversations with pastors, but then that time where they all get together and kind of talk and encourage one another as well.
Well, that's a great role and a great need, and you're good at it. And from what I can see and hear, you mentioned the church in transition. So you've written a book called "The Church During the Search," and I want to talk about your book in just a second. But first, let's do this. I'll pause here. My name's Todd Gray, KBC. This is Leadership Lessons. We're with Jason Lowe, who is the AMS for Pike Association of Churches in Pike County, Far East Kentucky. He's also the executive pastor for First Baptist Church Pikeville, which means he's doing two important ministry roles. So he's bivocational. And we're talking about a lot of different ministry things that he's involved in. We're getting ready to talk about his book called The Church During the Search. But Jason, fill in these blanks for me. What I'm celebrating right now is what?
That the Lord has kept my family safe, and most of our pastors, even those that maybe have experienced or contracted the virus, all of them have recovered. So I'm just celebrating that.
That's awesome. The thing I'm most excited about coming up is what?
The release of this book.
Yeah,
It's going to happen very soon.
That's great. When's it going to be? Is it not released yet?
Not technically. It goes.
Okay.
You can get it January 1st.
Okay, so I received an advance copy.
Yes.
Yeah. So what I've learned during COVID is what?
Wow, that's a tough one.
You're still learning it, aren't you?
Still learning it, yeah.
Yep.
But really, what I've learned during COVID is that the gathered church matters. We, myself included, I think it had taken for granted a lot of the blessings that in-person gatherings and small groups and all those things involved. We had done them for so long that I think we'd kind of gone through the motions. And so I know for me, I'm just reminded of we're meant to be together and to encourage one another and to love one another and to kind of encourage one another to love and good works. And that's hard to do right now.
It is. Yeah, it really is. I was at a church Sunday, Farmdale in Frankfort, and there was an old man there about as grumpy as I am most of the time. And he started to shake my hand, realized what he was doing. He pulled his hand back, and I said, I'm looking forward to being able to shake hands again. I said, but honestly, I don't miss all that hugging that people do. But I'm being a little facetious about that. We've been separated from folks for so long now. I don't even mind if somebody probably comes up and gives me a hug. You have two sons, Isaiah and Noah. How old are your sons?
They're 11 and 9.
11 and 9. Answer this question. My greatest desire for my sons is what?
That they honor the Lord in everything they do.
All right. Last fill in the blank. My hardest season in ministry was when?
Probably at the beginning, and it was quite honestly just because of so many things on my plate.
Yeah.
As I was serving at Morningside Baptist Church, bivocational role, I was working full-time for the hospital at that time, full-time seminary student, trying to be a full-time husband, and had 2 kids during that season. Very, very rough season, but the Lord was gracious through it. And there have been ups and downs, but certainly that was a very difficult season.
What do you think? You mentioned just so many things going on. Was that the primary reason? Just all the various things you were involved in and figuring out how to manage all your workload?
Yeah. It's sleep was pretty low on the priority list during those days, and I've had several friends and ministry colleagues encourage me to go on and pursue a doctorate. I'm not opposed to that, but when I just think about that season, I very quickly say, you know what, it's a great thought, but I think I'm okay.
Well, it wouldn't be anything like. I mean, you've learned a lot since then. You were in your first ministry position, so I'd encourage you in that same direction. Because the way you do it is just so different than the workload's so different. But you'd manage it fine. So let's talk about your book. So first off, great cover, and tell us how you ended up with the cover.
Well, I designed a few options for a cover myself. and put it on social media. And again, I like stats. I asked people to vote, and there were 4 options. That cover obviously wasn't that specific cover, but a very similar cover to that was by far and away the number 1 option. So then when the publisher asked about the cover, I actually sent the image of what I'd created, and they created something very similar.
Well, they did a really good job. It's a good looking book, and it's good to read. So what? I have a couple of questions related. So everybody that would listen to leadership lessons probably knows what a search team is, but take a second and describe what a search team is, and then why you wanted to write this book in particular.
A search team is those that the church has given the authority and the responsibility to search for the church's next pastor, or if it's a staff position, the next staff member or whatever, but they're responsible for that search. It's usually a group between 5 to 9, just depending on the size of the church. It's a good cross section of the church usually, and it needs to be folks that have the opportunity to commit to it. Somebody that has a very busy schedule is going to have a hard time being on a pastor search committee because you've got to invest the time that it's going to take. It's a huge responsibility. Every search team I've ever trained, I tell them, take a deep breath, pray a lot. This is going to take a while, and people are going to question you. Church members are going to that don't have a good idea of what's going on behind the scenes. They're going to invent their own thoughts about what's going on.
If church members are listening and they're at the place where they're trying to form a search committee or search team, because that's usually done it's just done in a business meeting that they pick 5 people, 7 people, whatever. They have different ways of picking them. You mentioned a very busy person who can't adjust their schedule shouldn't be on the search team. Anybody else that should not be on a search committee in your view?
There are a couple of examples that I can think of, and these are examples that I've encountered in the association here. One would be a husband and a wife should not serve on a pastor search committee together, because usually what that means is that's 2 votes on a group of 5 to 7. So I just think it's wise most of the time for husband and wife not to serve. One or the other would be fine, but not necessarily both. And another group that I would encourage not to serve on a pastor search committee is somebody that has an agenda, quite honestly. Somebody that is adamant that the next pastor has to meet this certain list of items, whether those are scripture-based or opinion-based or preference, whatever. So somebody that has a pretty inflexible agenda is probably not a good candidate for a search committee.
Well, that's super helpful. What are some pitfalls that you've seen search committees make as they enter into the process of searching for a pastor?
Rushing the process is probably one of the biggest. Is the average pastor search process takes typically about 12 to 18 months. There are churches that do it in a shorter amount of time. Some take longer, as some of the examples I've shared. But I would encourage pastor search committee not to rush, to be patient, allow God to work through the process. Another area is to be prayerful, and so a lot of search committees run into problems when they don't pray. I read in a book somewhere that I think it's called "When the Word Leads Your Search," says that prayer is like dental floss for pastor search committees. A lot of people know that they need to floss, but they don't actually take the time to floss. And prayer is the same way. A lot of times we know that we need to pray, but there's so many tasks that a pastor search committee needs to do that they rush and they don't really spend that time that they need to in prayer.
That's so
helpful. Those are a couple pitfalls.
Who is the audience for this book?
The audience is actually not really for the pastor search committee, although I do think that pastor search committees will benefit from it. But I'll tell you, I had a conversation. I've served as interim pastor of several of our churches in the association. And last year, here's the reality, with 7 churches that are open, I can't be in all of those churches serving as an interim pastor. And so something that we started last year about this time was something called an interim pastor cohort, where I identified several men in the association and started to meet with them about twice a month to kind of walk through what an interim pastor does in order to try to raise up some others. As I was advertising for that cohort, had a gentleman in one of our churches who sent me a message and said, "Hey, that's great that you're doing that. I think that's fantastic. But what I think needs to happen is there needs to be a resource written for the average church member in the pew who doesn't know all the ins and outs of a search process. They don't know what's really going on." This gentleman had been a member of the church that I just finished being an interim pastor at. And so I said, you know what, you're right. And so I cannot take credit for the idea for the book. It was really Jim Altman was his brother's name that gave me the idea for the book. And so the book is meant for the person in the pew that's not on the search committee primarily. And what I recommend that they do is commit throughout the search process to 6 different commitments. Number 1, be prepared. And what I mean by that is be prepared to expect the unexpected. Mm-hmm. Be prepared at times not to know who's preaching on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Be prepared to not hear anything from the search committee at times. And so I challenge church members to be prepared, be informed about what God defines as faithfulness for your pastor. And so I kind of walk through Psalm 23 and walk through the primary roles of a pastor or a shepherd, which are to feed the flock, lead the flock, protect the flock, and comfort the flock. So kind of walk through that. And then a big commitment is they need to be humble and not allow their desires for their next pastor to become demands and basically force their pastor search committee to search for somebody that meets all of these criteria that, quite honestly, maybe even the Lord couldn't meet all those criteria. So be humble is a commitment. Be prayerful, as I've mentioned already. They need to be prayerful. They need to be patient, even as a church, because one of the biggest issues that I see in an interim period is the church members are always asking the search committee every week, you got an update? You got an update? When are you going to call a pastor? When are you going to call a pastor? And so in that commitment, I just kind of walk them through what are the phases of a search committee. I obviously don't go into the level of detail that I would with a pastor search committee, but just the general phases of a search process for church members. And then the last commitment is they need to be productive. The church is still the church, even when you don't have a pastor. The lost people all around the church still need to find Jesus, even when you don't have a pastor. And so the Great Commission still applies even when you don't have a pastor. And so it's really meant for the average church member. And quite honestly, there's not a lot of resources out there like that, which is why I wrote the book.
Would you like some feedback?
Sure. Absolutely.
Right. I love it. I'm at least a third of the way in, maybe getting closer to halfway in. First off, you're a good writer, Jason. You're a really good writer. Anyone who reads this book they're going to enjoy reading it first. Initially, you use really good illustrations, good analogies, good, simple, plain, common sense writing. Folks will nod their head while they're reading it. You're hitting on the highlights in the book. I do disagree a little bit with you, and you're not saying this for sure, but I do think that every member of a search team ought to read this book. Everybody on a search team should have a copy of this book, and they should read it and take 10 minutes at the beginning of each meeting they have, at least initially, to talk about what they've recently read. But I think for you to get the biggest bang for the buck, you're going to have to produce 6 15-minute videos to go along with the book and a study guide that you can share with churches, so that because not every church member will read a book, period, and not everyone would read this book, but they could sit in on a Wednesday night Bible study where this book's being taught. And it would be great for a church to have 6 weeks of the content of this book in you teaching 15 minutes, discussion questions to follow, because it's really good. You've done a super job. Let me mention a few highlights here and see if I can pry an example out of you. So under the section, what's that?
Let me go ahead and say, Those are great suggestions. I have a few videos already recorded
Yeah.
for that, and so some discussion questions in the back. So yeah, I agree with you 100% that a lot of people won't read it, and hopefully though they'll watch those videos.
One of my favorite sections is what your next pastor is looking for in you. You've already talked about what the church should be looking for in their pastor, but then you ask this question: has it ever crossed your mind that he might have a wish list as well? Question mark. I can promise you he does. What are pastors looking for in church members?
Well, there's a lot of answers to that question, but I'll keep it very short, and really that's based upon that question is based upon Philippians chapter 2, and Paul talks about in the reference of that text how the Philippian church can complete his joy, or in other words, bless his heart as their founding pastor. Obviously, wasn't the pastor at that point, but he talks about unity and humility. If a church is humble, they're more likely to be unified. But if they're not humble and if they're making their desires turn into demands, I can guarantee you that church is going to be a divided church. Everybody's putting their own preferences above others, and so I haven't met many pastor candidates when they call me about a potential church in the association. If I were to tell them, that church, they can't get along with anybody, they can't get along with any pastor, it's a difficult church. Usually they don't line up to send their resume to that church.
Plus, they think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. So if there's pride and division, opposites of unity and humility. Well, you make this statement on page 53. You say, when church members selfishly look out only for their own interest, conflict and division are the guaranteed result. Without getting specific, you work with a bunch of different churches, and you've worked with a bunch of different churches. Any examples of when you've seen church members selfishly look out for their own interest and the result being conflict and division in the church?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've seen several examples of churches that there's a divide in the church about what the next pastor needs to look like as far as his age, experience, his focus areas, his strengths, those types of things. And I've seen it get to the point that there's been a mass exodus of people from the church because the search committee went the opposite direction of what they were looking for. And so I've heard of very contentious business meetings where these things have come up. I've also heard of churches when the search committee wasn't communicating a whole lot with the church and letting them know what was going on. They began to fill in the blanks themselves. Sure. And you would see churches that usually are not what I would call churches that are typically divided or contentious, but then very quickly they become that way because you've got some people that are wanting more information than they're getting. And so they demand more information. When they don't get it, it causes division. So there's so many examples. I won't get real specific, but sure. Read the book. There's a few in there that I kind of touch on.
Well, they're really good. So one of the things you bring out is the pastor is to be a shepherd of the flock, and shepherds protect the flock. And so you mentioned sometimes a pastor may need to call out a popular radio preacher, television preacher who's kind of a false prophet maybe, or preaching a health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. And how are you going to respond when a preacher says, this book you're reading is really not a sound book, or this preacher you're listening to is not someone you should be listening to? You said sometimes they fight back and make false accusations against the pastor. Sometimes they yell at him. Sometimes they withhold their tithe. Very immature. Sometimes they leave. I said very immature. You didn't write that in the book. Have you seen these things happen?
Every one of them. Yeah.
What's been your biggest disappointment, Jason, in seeing some inappropriate responses to church members when they were being given good counsel?
I think it's my biggest disappointment is quite simple, that people, when they won't stay to kind of work out their problems, that they say, you know what, I don't have to take this, I'm just going to leave, and then they hold their church membership very lightly. They don't commit to the church. like they should. Anytime I hear of a group, whether it's a small group or even a major church split, it just breaks my heart.
Yep. Well, if you love churches and love people, that's bound to be the case. So I mentioned that you tell really good stories and you have good illustrations. So I love that about your book, and at the same time, it's a solid work that you've produced. So you told a story about a lack of communication, and before cell phones were around, your parents were away from home, and they were expected home around 5 o'clock, and 6 o'clock came, 7 o'clock. This great snow was happening. You hadn't heard anything, and you immediately started worrying about them, and all these different scenarios went through your mind. Their car broke down. They froze to death. They slid off the road and drove over a cliff. They decided it was too bad to travel, and I'll be home alone all night. Um, are you a worrier?
At times,
Yeah, well, I am too. I mean,
I can.
I'm not asking. I mean, so I could easily be a worrier. I can find the cloud in every silver lining, or in every blue
Yeah.
sky. What have you done to overcome worry so that's not a debilitating force in your life?
Um, I, there's a polar opposite between worry and faith. Quite honestly,
Yeah.
faith and fear are polar opposites. I've used it to describe it this way in churches. It's like if you depending on where you are. Some people in the state, some people refer to this as a seesaw, and some refer to it as a teeter totter. Which one do you refer to that playground equipment as?
Yeah, seesaws are where I'm from.
Okay, all right. Well, basically, just as one goes up, the other goes down. So as worry increases, it means your faith and your trust in the Lord are going down. But as your faith and your trust in the Lord begin to increase, then worry has no choice but to decrease. And so, how do I deal with worry in my own life? Is quite simply, I will think about the promises of God. I'll be reminded of His love for me, the promises that He said He will never leave me, He will never forsake me. I don't live under the false belief that bad things won't happen, because I know they
Right.
will. But I know that God is with me even in the midst of those trials. And so that's how I deal with worry. It's just try to think about what do I believe? What's true?
Yeah.
And usually I quit worrying whenever that happens.
Well, that's Philippians 4, 6, 7, and 8. Satan loves to use worry to get us away from trusting the Lord and looking at our problems. One additional thing I've done that I found helpful is to make a list of all the possible bad things that, everything that could happen, the thing I'm worried about. And sometimes when I actually make the list and read it out loud, I just start laughing because I think, that's probably not going to happen. The thing that's unspoken in your mind is probably not going to be the issue that happens. And if the worst does happen, God is still good. He still loves us, and He's going to ultimately bring good out of it. Well, I appreciate getting to discuss that with you, Jason. Hey, so you're not. I mean, you also read books. You don't just write books. What are you reading right now? What book are you reading?
I am reading The Post-Quarantine Church by Dr. Tom Rainer right now.
Really? What are you learning
Yes.
from it?
Um, Church after this pandemic is behind us is going to look a lot different than what it did before, according to Dr. Rainer's kind of research and just his conversations with other church leaders. And so I think churches need to be prepared for some adjustments. Some of those may be major adjustments, some of them may be not so major, but just be prepared for those adjustments and embrace some of those changes. Not all change is bad. There's going to be some changes that are actually going to help the church in the future. And so that's the point that I'm getting from the book thus far, is that, don't just think that the sky is falling because of COVID. This has been a challenging year. We all know that. We recognize that. But we do also believe that God can use these things for His good and for His glory. And so churches that look for those ways to do so are going to be much better off once we're through this.
Someone that I had on leadership lessons, maybe Dan Summerlin, said that COVID was the great revealer, and that it reveals what's in us. If a church is already in bad shape, it's in really bad shape right now. But it's also the great leveler. It was kind of fun, Jason, when we were first starting out, that in terms of technology, churches can be, really 50 years apart. There's some Kentucky Baptist churches that are kind of way back years on technology, and this summer that are on the cutting edge. Well, that's over now. Churches are now about 2 weeks apart. Some are a couple of weeks out in front of the others, but the other ones are going to catch up shortly. So it's a great leveler as well as a great revealer. Hey, on Gospel to Every Home, that's an initiative that's happening right now in the state of Kentucky. 1,728,681 homes in Kentucky. The first phase was for all those homes to be adopted. We're almost there, by the way. We're well over 90% of those homes being adopted by an association like your own, or in some cases, some churches. Is a Pike Association going to be involved in trying to get the gospel to every home?
Absolutely. We live in a county that is 2 out of every 3 people don't claim to be a Christian. 3 out of every 4 people are not a member of any church, regardless of denomination, and 11 out of every 12 people in Pike County before COVID didn't go to church on any given Sunday. And so 92% of our county is unchurched. And so that's the primary mission of the Pike Association, is to work together to reach those people with the gospel. Until 100% of the residents of Pike County know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, we've got work to do.
Good
and
job.
So the Gospel to Every Home is one of those initiatives that we can use to get our folks outside the 4 walls of their church, out into the community. Any way that we can encourage our churches to be evangelistic, I'm all for. And so our plan right now is hopefully, it looks like we're seeing the end of COVID hopefully coming in the coming months. And so our desire is to really do a blitz this spring by around Easter, and then follow that up with any homes that we didn't hit. We want to get the gospel to them by this summer when we do our Love Loud project.
You're a native of East Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky. You grew up attending church, became a Christian while you were in college, have come back to minister in the area where you have grown up. You know the area as well as anybody. What are the greatest, when it comes to evangelism, what are some of the greatest evangelism challenges in East Kentucky? Some of the roadblocks or barriers to sharing the gospel?
Number one would be, I think, fear on the part of those who share. We don't know really what to say sometimes. We're afraid to have those hard conversations. And we know that God doesn't give us the spirit of fear. We know where that fear comes from. It's the enemy trying to keep us from proclaiming the gospel. And so fear certainly is a big challenge. But that's true everywhere. It's not only true here in Pike County. Here, some challenges are just the lay of the land, how spread out it is. When you go up a holler, if you go up to the head of the holler, you may have a legitimate physical fear for your safety going up there. There's some people that don't want you to come near them. And so that's a challenge. There are certainly some neighborhoods here that are more likely to have some of those encounters than others. But that's certainly a challenge here. The other challenge is that even though most of our people around here don't claim to be a Christian, they think they're religious. Mm-hmm. They've got some type of connection. They like to talk to the big man upstairs or something like that. But having a saving knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, they don't have. But they think they're okay anyway, and that's always a challenge for anywhere.
Well, Jason, our time is wrapping up. Man, I just want to tell you thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for taking some time to talk about these questions. Thank you for your book. Are you going to write another book?
Not right now. I have no plans to.
What's been the toughest thing about this whole book process for you?
Well, writing the book, and I think I told you this privately, that was the easy part. It seemed like it's everything, the editing, and the promotion of it. I'm very grateful for our publisher, but it's a small publisher, and so a lot of the promotion has been on my shoulders. I mailed out 400 copies all over the country. That took a while. So there's a lot of work that goes into book writing. It's always been a dream of mine to write one. So I'm glad I did it, but I'm in no rush to write another one right now.
Well, it's called The Church During the Search. You've done a really good job, not only of the book and the content. I've seen you on social media getting it out to people and getting the word out. I'd encourage any church member that your church is without a pastor to get a hold of this book as soon as you can. What's the easiest way to get a hold of you, Jason? How would you want folks to reach out to you?
Best way is just go to my website, jasonalowe.com, and they can order the book right from there. They can also send me an email or phone call from there too.
Jason A. Lowe, Lowe.
Yes.
.com, and so we can put that in the notes later on. Any church that's looking for a pastor would be helped by reading this book. Any search team member, anyone that works with churches, any AMS, DOM, Association of Missionary, whatever term he uses, would be blessed for this book. Jason, appreciate your good work in Kentucky. Appreciate your friendship, and thank you for taking the time. Merry Christmas to you and to your family.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. Merry Christmas to you, and Merry Christmas to Kentucky Baptists all across the state.
Thank you.